Where do the Dallas Cowboys stack up in the NFC East for the 2023 season? We talk about that and so much more coming up next here on Locked On NFL.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. We're your daily NFL podcast here, and I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher, one of the many NFL experts on our network. We're free and available all podcasting platforms. That includes over in video form on YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On NFL is sponsored by BetterHelp. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn today to get 10% off of your first month. And we're back here bringing you all the biggest stories across the league and pretty Dallas Cowboys oriented today, as we're going to talk with Marcus Mosher in the first part of the show about Zach Martin, the Cowboys agreeing to a deal with him, and also where they stack up right now in an NFC East. It obviously has Philadelphia, New York, and Washington, so that's going to be a great conversation. And in the second part of the show, we'll still stick with a former Dallas Cowboy and Ezekiel Elliott, who's down with the New England Patriots, and talk with Mike Debate of Locked On Patriots about where he fits in to the Patriots offensive equation. And finally, with me being the host of Locked On Ravens, I'll take you through the final part of the show. We'll be talking about the Ravens signings over the last couple of days and what's happened with Marlon Humphrey, and also obviously them adding Ronald Darby and Jadeveon Clowney. So without any further ado, let's first get into our conversation with Marcus Mosher of Locked On Cowboys. Well, the Dallas Cowboys and Zach Martin finally agree the saga is over, and here to talk about that with me is Marcus Mosher, one of the hosts over at Locked On Cowboys. And Marcus, I know that this is probably a relief to you, to Cowboys fans, to the organization, that finally Zach Martin is back out there on the field. I know Jerry Jones a couple of days ago, or maybe it was a week ago at this point, made a couple of comments that rub some people the wrong way. But can you kind of take us through this whole Zach Martin saga and how happy you are that it's finally over?
Oh, I mean, absolutely thrilled. And so the Cowboys players, when Martin returned to the locker room, they basically threw him a party. That's how well liked and well respected he is in that locker room. Listen, I think everybody knew what was eventually going to go on here. They knew the Cowboys were going to pay. They were going to give Zach Martin a pay increase. It was just how much were the Cowboys willing to budge on this one? Zach Martin, who's been, I mean, pretty unquestionably the best guard in football over the last 5 or 6 years, hasn't been paid like it at all. I don't think the Cowboys wanted to make him the highest paid guard in the league after still having 2 years on his contract, but they made him the third highest paid guard, and now they're very, very happy that he's back into the fold.
Yeah, and so do you think this was a good deal for Dallas, a good deal for Martin? Was it even both ways? What were your kind of initial reactions to it?
I mean, the Cowboys paid the best guard in the league, not top guard money. So how can you not be excited about that, right? You still have Chris Lindstrom and Quentin Nelson getting paid more than Zach Martin. The Cowboys have a tendency to take care of their elite players, and they'll make exceptions for players like Zach Martin, who, again, had 2 years still left on his deal. They could have played hardball with him, but this is a team with Super Bowl aspirations. You don't mess around with one of your most important players.
Right, and the offensive line, at least to me, Marcus, it all starts up front for an offense, and Martin being, I agree, the best guard in football, he's important to have there. But how does the rest of the Dallas offensive line look with Martin back?
Well, one of the reasons why it was so important that they got him back is that their starting five that they have right now has never taken a snap together at any point, with Tyron Smith at left tackle, Tyler Smith at left guard, Tyler Biadasz at center, and then Tyler Steele at right tackle. They just need to start playing together. And I don't think we're going to see that in the preseason. It hasn't happened so far, but they need the practice reps. And I think that's one of the reasons there was some urgency here is, hey, get Zach Martin in with 3 weeks until week 1. If this group can stay healthy, I expect it to be a top 8 or so unit. The problem is they just don't have a lot of depth, but getting Zach Martin back is a great step into keeping this offensive line one of the best in the league.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of intrigue about Dallas's offense. Obviously, a new offensive system coming up with the departure of Kellen Moore. Dak Prescott hopefully is going to have a big year for them. How is the Dallas offense looking as a whole, especially when you bring in a guy like Brandon Cooks to put opposite of CeeDee Lamb?
I mean, it looks really good on paper now, right? Like everybody's offense looks good on paper in August. You're always excited about all the new pieces. But to me, this is still, it's all about Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb. When those two are together, they are lights out on offense. They're actually the highest scoring team in the NFL over the last 3 seasons when they have Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb on the field together. As long as they can keep those guys healthy, I think they're going to be just fine. The offensive line is really my concern because I'm going to keep mentioning this. They just don't have a lot of depth. And if Tyron Smith, who has not made it through a full season over the last 4 years, if he struggles or he misses time with injury, things could go south pretty quickly for this offense.
And one of the things that I know a lot of people have a question about Marcus is Mike McCarthy and kind of where his seat is in terms of temperature level right now. So I know you mentioned the high expectations, Super Bowl aspirations for Dallas this season. Where are you kind of on Mike McCarthy's Dallas tenure and what needs to happen this year to keep him there for at least another season?
I just find this whole Mike McCarthy hot seat stuff so funny because McCarthy has now won 12 games or more in each of the last 2 seasons. They went 5-1 with a backup quarterback last year. They won a road playoff game against Tampa Bay and Tom Brady, and they absolutely obliterated Tom Brady. And then they lost a divisional game against a team that they weren't favored to beat. But all of a sudden, now Mike McCarthy's on the hot seat. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. He's a Super Bowl winning coach who has had a ton of success in the league. If he has another 10-win season and the Cowboys are in the playoffs, I'm just not sure how you can fire that guy. Even if the expectations are really high. I think a lot of people expect the Cowboys to be one of the top 3 or 4 teams in the NFC. If they lose in the divisional round to Philadelphia or San Fran, is that really a reason for them to get rid of Mike McCarthy? I don't think so.
Yeah, speaking of expectations, I know last year, Marcus, we were kind of talking about not how good the NFC East was going to be. People didn't have a lot of expectations for them. There was the whole NFC least conversation that was going on there, but they turned into, I think, one of the best, if not the best divisions in football last year. So with Philly obviously coming off a Super Bowl appearance, the Giants overachieved by a lot of expectations last year. Even Washington is a team to potentially look out for. How does Dallas stack up in the division, do you think, this season?
Well, the good news for the Cowboys is that they've always played the division really well. And even last year, they went 5-1 in the division, splitting with Philadelphia. I still think the Eagles are the favorite. They should be the favorite. And I would be pretty surprised if they don't win the division. Having said that, I think the difference between Dallas and Philadelphia is pretty small. And the difference between Dallas and New York is still pretty big. So I think the Cowboys can feel pretty confident that they're at least the number 2 team in this division. And I think they'd have to fall off by quite a bit to fall to 3rd or 4th in the NFC East this year.
Yeah. And I know that within the division, there potentially could be 3 teams that make the playoffs, potentially 4 teams. I know some people might be expecting a fall off from some teams or some others, but I still think it's going to be a pretty good division. But Marcus, let's round it up with a couple of running back questions. Tony Pollard, obviously becoming the unquestioned back there in Dallas. How do you feel about his workload this year and what he can bring is the guy in Dallas this year?
Oh, I've got no problems about his workload. I think the Cowboys can give him as many touches as they want, and he's going to be just fine. I do think Dallas is going to be careful here not to overwork him because they want him to be fresh in January when the games really matter. But I still expect him to get somewhere between 18 and 22 touches a week. How they divvy out those touches is going to be interesting, but I really think that Tony Pollard has a chance to lead the NFL in rushing yards this season.
Yeah, he's somebody he's so versatile and I think a very underrated back too. So I think Dallas made a good decision by placing their trust in him. But obviously, Marcus, with Tony Pollard getting the full workload, Ezekiel Elliott no longer there, signed with the Patriots earlier last week. From watching him and kind of his career arc throughout his entire time in the NFL, what do you think he can provide to New England? And what do you think he has left in the tank?
Yeah, I actually think New England is one of the few spots that I think Zeke can have success because he's a very willing and good blocker. So you can use him as a fullback in some situation. You can use him as a pass blocker, and he's going to be fine. And I think if you want somebody that can do some of the short yardage and goal line stuff, I think he can really help Ramondre Stevenson there. But anything more than that, if you're asking him to be like a 10 to 12 touch player a game, at this stage of his career, I just don't think it makes a lot of sense. But as a part-time back that does mostly blocking and some short yardage running back, I think he'll be fine. View him more as a fullback than a running back, and I think you'll be pleased with his play.
A huge shout out to Marcus for diving into the Cowboys and giving us his insight. And for more on Marcus and his work, be sure to check out the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming up in the second part of the show, we'll be diving into our talk with Mike Debate as we talk Ezekiel Elliott, where Mac Jones is right now before the 2023 season and more. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to talk about on Locked On NFL. But first, this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. And there are a bunch of times when you could be feeling uncertain about where you're going in life or what the right path is, even how to get through that. And sometimes in life, we're all faced with tough choices and the path forward isn't always very clear. You have to make decisions that are hard, or maybe there's just a certain path you don't know how to explore yet. So whether you're dealing with decisions around career, relationships, or anything else, therapy helps you stay connected to what's really important and what you want while you navigate through your life, so you can move forward with confidence and excitement and trust in yourself to make decisions that align with your values. Is like anything, the more you practice it, the easier it gets. And there are so many people who've benefited from therapy, and many people have very positive experiences, such as learning positive coping skills. It can help you learn how to set boundaries. It can empower you to become the best version of yourself. And it isn't just for those who've experienced major trauma. It's for everyone. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. We're back, our second segment of Locked On NFL. Kevin Oestreicher still here talking NFL footballs. We're so close to the regular season coming back, and it's an exciting time here as we figure out, who's making these 53-man rosters, who's in danger of getting cut. But we do know that Ezekiel Elliott signed to the New England Patriots earlier last week, and so we'll talk with Mike Debate now about where he fits into the Patriots offense and more. So we're going to dive into that right now. Well, the New England Patriots add a running back in Ezekiel Elliott. Here to talk about that with me is Mike Debate, the host of Locked On Patriots. And Mike, I think there was an inkling the Patriots weren't done this offseason. They've been linked to Dalvin Cook, linked to DeAndre Hopkins. Don't get either of those guys, but they do land Ezekiel Elliott, obviously the former Dallas Cowboys running back. Was this a move? Was Zeke a guy that you thought the Patriots were actively targeting and a guy you thought was going to come in?
Yeah, I think when news broke that Ezekiel Elliott was visiting the New England Patriots, I think all of a sudden a lot of optimism started to brew within the fan base, and people started to be able to see him in a Patriots uniform. Look, prior to that, I know a lot of Patriots fans, members of the media, were not really that bullish on the Patriots going after Zeke or pursuing him in free agency. Most of us believe that Dalvin Cook may be, more of a pursued target than Ezekiel Elliott. We talked about it right here on Locked On NFL, Kevin, a few weeks ago, that the Patriots were probably in on Dalvin and they were going to kick the tires and see what was there. But I think during that meeting, especially in the aftermath of that, and those notorious photos that were circulating throughout social media, and you saw Zeke dining out with Mac Jones and with Ramondre Stevenson, I think that meeting of the three of them really kind of gave everyone and all parties involved an indication that these sides could work together and that Zeke was someone that the Patriots needed. I think they needed a veteran presence in that depth chart, and I think Zeke fills it nicely, and I think he's going to continue to do that. He's definitely got the qualities that the Patriots were looking for in a running back. It's about putting it all together on the field now at this point.
And that deal for Zeke, Mike, if I'm not mistaken, a 1 year, $4.5 million base salary worth up to $6 million for him, with a couple of somewhat easy to reach incentives. And you would hope that Zeke would be able to reach those for the sake of his wallet. But do you think that was a deal that favors the Patriots, favors Zeke, or is just right in the middle for both sides?
I think it's a fair deal for both sides. Look, I think Zeke is coming in here knowing that the Patriots were not going to acquiesce to all of the requests that he was going to make for a salary, and that they know that there are, certain things that have to be earned on a football field, especially here in Foxborough. But at the same time, I think the Patriots recognized that Zeke wasn't going to come here for the bargain basement discount either. He knew his value. He had a value on the open market. I think both sides came together, found a happy medium, and I think you're going to see both sides happy. Zeke looks tremendously happy to be here in New England, and the Patriots look like they're happy to have him. So I think a good deal all around for both sides.
And let's talk a bit about his role. Obviously, the Ramondre Stevenson, kind of the breakout star at the running back position for the Patriots in 2022. He's obviously going to have a big role, but where does Zeke fit in all this, and how does he complement Ramondre in the offense?
Well, right now, what I think the Patriots realized they needed was help in the red zone. This was a team that was extremely futile last year in the red zone, whether it be running the football or whether it be in 2-minute passing drills deep within enemy territory inside the 20. Ezekiel Elliott fixes part of that because he's at his best when he's in the red zone. Even though his numbers took a statistical dip last season and taking a little bit of a backseat to Tony Pollard in Dallas, he still managed to lead the NFL in red zone rushing attempts with 59. 31 of those came inside the 10-yard line. He had 11 touchdowns inside the 20. This is where the New England Patriots, I think, are going to utilize him to his capacity because we've already started to see it. He didn't get any action against the Green Bay Packers in preseason game 2, but in those joint practices leading up to Saturday night's game, he did get some red zone work, had an impressive pair of touchdowns, one of them for an 8-yard gain, breaking the defensive seal set by the Packers, and then he scored on a goal line carry as well. So I think that's where you're going to see him utilized. You might see him maybe dust off those pass catching skills that he did have in his early days in Dallas. Now, he hasn't done that as much as of late, again, because Pollard is so good at being a receiving back. But I think the Patriots are going to utilize him more in that fashion because they could use some help in that department.
Yeah, and I know for the Patriots, they've added Juju Smith-Schuster, now with Zeke coming in, and obviously Mike Gesicki there, former Dolphins, so AFC East transferring teams over there. They've added some offensive weapons around Mac Jones. How do you think all these additions will benefit him in the long run, especially this season?
Well, the more weapons and the more options you can put around Mac, the more comfortable he's going to be. You started to see that in Mac Jones over the course of the last couple of days, especially in joint practices against the Packers and in a very limited sample size of a few snaps that he took against the Packers on Saturday night. When you spread the field and you have options, not only running options, but effective weapons that can not only get open down the field, but also receivers that can find their way under the defense so you can feed them the ball quickly, accurately, only where they can catch it, and then allow them to get yards after the catch. That's going to be big. So Juju Smith-Schuster fills that bill quite nicely. So does Mike Gesicki, who gives you options either on the perimeter or in the slot. He's a little banged up right now, keeping a close eye on Mike Gesicki's health. They're hoping that he's going to be ready for opening day, but if not, you've got guys like Hunter Henry, who's a seasoned veteran in this system, Kendrick Bourne, Devontae Parker. Everyone's kind of stepping it up a little bit, and especially the two rookie wide receivers, Kayshon Boutte and Demario Douglas, giving this Patriots team a little bit more of a dimension. So you add Ezekiel Elliott into the mix of Ramondre and all these guys. Patriots offense is going to click on more cylinders than they did last year, provided they get the cooperation from their offensive line. That's the big concern right now in New England. They have not been good. They got to step it up.
Yeah, I always say it all starts up front for an offense. So the offensive line is an absolute key for the success of any NFL offense, especially in this day and age. But Mike, you mentioned guys stepping up, whether it be joint practices, training camp, the preseason. Who are some guys that have impressed you so far for the Patriots?
Well, not to be repetitive, but the two rookie wide receivers have really impressed me when it comes to Demario Douglas and his prowess in the slot. He's been an excellent weapon in getting yards after the catch, in getting open, and making tough contested catches over the middle. For a guy his size, he's not necessarily playing at just barely 6 feet and under 200 pounds. You know, I use the Shakespeare quote where I say he be but little, but he's fierce. That's exactly how Demario Douglas plays the game. And Kayshon Boutte is showing some flashes of the first year and a half he was at LSU and breaking some of those records that were held by really revered wide receivers in that system. Boutte can put together and continue to string these together. He might be looking at a roster spot. On the opposite side of the ball, Keion White has been phenomenal for the New England Patriots as a defensive end, as a pass rusher. This is a guy that continuously brings the pressure to a quarterback and even can drop and be a successful run defender as well. So these are the guys that have popped and surprised me so far. obviously Christian Gonzalez, the crown jewel of this draft class. He'll continue to be, but between White and between Douglas and Butte and even Marte Mapu, who's starting to get some reps now, Patriots did pretty well for themselves in the top half of this draft.
Mike has always provided great Patriots analysis, and hopefully Ezekiel Elliott can provide some great play on the field for New England in 2023. But for more on Mike's work, be sure to check him out over the Locked On Patriots podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming up here on Locked On NFL, we'll be rounding out the show. I'll be talking Ravens with you. We'll be talking Jadeveon Clowney, Ronald Darby, Marlon Humphrey, and so much more. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to dive into on the show. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, and football season is about to kick off, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to win all season long, because right now when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every time they win in the regular season. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and you'll get bonus bets for every victory. You can use your bonus bets on spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So if you have a good feeling about maybe it's the Cowboys, maybe it's the Patriots, maybe even the Ravens, you can bet on them and get bonus bets on them in the regular season. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. We're back here rounding out Locked On NFL. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here. And there's a lot to dive into when it comes to the entire league. But for the Baltimore Ravens, as I'll be talking with you about right now, there's a lot, I think, of uncertainty at certain positions, but I think Baltimore has done their best to alleviate as much of that as they can. Now, over the course of the last week, it was very busy for the Ravens. It didn't, kind of mid last week, honestly, where on Wednesday, Marlon Humphrey announced that he underwent surprising surgery. There really was not any inclination that he was hurt, but John Harbaugh clarified it was a lingering thing, and so Marlon Humphrey goes under the knife. And the timeline, the Ravens have one. They're not going to reveal it. But the initial thought is it will be maybe about a month from when the surgery happens. So maybe he'll be back by week 3, week 4. But Baltimore, they have a cautious approach when it comes to getting their guys back on the field. We've seen that over the past couple of seasons. So maybe the Ravens will take that timeline and give Marlon Humphrey a few more weeks to get close to 100, as close to 100% as he will be able to get. But for the Ravens, it's about a couple of different things, because with Humphrey going down, the corner room was already a concern to begin with, even with Humphrey healthy, because Humphrey, is a top 5 guy. He's one of the best corners, if not the best corner in the league, depending on, where your thought process is. But other than that, it was Rock Ya-Sin, who the Ravens traded. Essentially traded out Marcus Peters for Rock Ya-Sin. It was Rock Ya-Sin as a second guy, and then a bunch of young, unproven guys like Jalen Armour-Davis, Pepe Williams, Caillou Kelly, Kevon Seymour. They have a couple of low-level vets sprinkled in like Darryl Worley and Arthur Millette. It was really a disaster if Marlon Humphrey were to go down, much like he did. So I think Baltimore's thought process was they were just going to try to trust their young guys and see if a couple could step up. But they've already been dealing with not only Humphrey, but Rock Ya-Sin's been out for a couple weeks. Jalen Armour-Davis been in and out. Pepe Williams is going to be out until October. So the Ravens go out there and they sign Ronald Darby, who played really well for the Broncos last season until he tore his ACL in week 5. So he's been coming off of that process, did practice with the Ravens. But I think for Darby, once Humphrey comes back, and this is not a season-ending thing, the Ravens, John Harbaugh has made that very clear. He's going to be able to come back hopefully in the earlier part of the regular season. But when Humphrey and Ya-Sin and Darby, with those 3 guys you can trust in a trio. There wasn't really a trio you could trust in that Ravens corner room. You were just kind of hoping if you're a Baltimore, someone was going to be able to step up. So I think the Darby signing, if he's able to get back to what he was, the level he was at last year in Denver, that's a very solid signing for them. It wasn't a huge contract either, right? About $3.5 million or so. So I'm fine with the deal overall. I liked Ronald Darby. And look, at this time in August, we're not going to see like all the top corners available on the market. We're not in the beginning of the free agency period. So that's kind of the reality Baltimore was working with. And then when it comes to the edge department, the pass rushing department, there was always an inclination that Baltimore is probably going to add somebody. They lost Justin Houston to the Carolina Panthers. They were relying on Odafe Oweh and David Ojabo, a third-year guy and a second-year guy, to kind of pick up slack. The Ravens have lost right around 18 sacks from last year's team, but they bring in Jadeveon Clowney on a 1-year deal. Now, the deal itself is really good for the Ravens. It's $2.5 million base, which is incredible. It's a steal, up to $6 million in incentives. I don't think those incentives have been released, but Clowney brings a couple of things that I think Baltimore is going to value a lot. The physicality he brings is going to be one thing. The edge setting, the run defense. He's super physical. I think that's where the most of the physicality comes. he's very inconsistent with sack production. He actually has never hit 10 sacks in a season, despite being the number 1 overall pick of Houston back in 2014. And, all those expectations for him, but is a physical run defender, setting the edge presence with the upside for pass rush potential. It takes pressure off of Adafeowe. It takes pressure off of David Ojabo too. That signing to me, or the Clowney signing in itself, helps the Ravens depth-wise. And no roster can be perfect. Every roster is going to have a hole here or a hole there. You can't have 6 all-pros at a position at every single position. So for the Ravens, they add one of the best free agents left in Jadeveon Clowney, one of the best free agents left at his position in Ronald Darby. It kind of slots in their defense, and maybe the Ravens will have to make a trade deadline addition at corner or add another pass rusher. They obviously made the move for Roquan Smith last trade deadline, and it worked out really, really well for him. But at this point, I think Baltimore has to kind of wonder about when Humphrey comes back and what can Clowney provide them. And it's about health with these guys. For any NFL team, it's about health and figuring out how much of your roster can you have and honestly, can you keep healthy up until the playoffs start? Because for me, we've seen teams that have great rosters on paper heading in the regular season. It happens every year. It's a great team heading into the regular season on paper, and then injuries happen. It decimates teams. And that team obviously plays well below expectations because an injury, it lowers your floor and it lowers your ceiling. It lowers both. And in most, some players are not good, and it's addition by subtraction. But for the most part, if you lose a player, it's going to lower your floor and lower your ceiling. So for Humphrey in the corner room for the Ravens, they're going to have to figure out on defense how they want to disguise that weakness in the corner room, because it is a weakness. Even with Humphrey, it was a bit of a weakness. But Humphrey helps, and now you don't have that for however long it is. So maybe that is manufacturing blitzes and generating pressure with 5, 6, 7 guys. But then you're leaving these young guys, these inexperienced guys, one-on-one. And how much of a leash do you want to be giving to those players when the Ravens right now have very high Super Bowl aspirations, playoff aspirations, and a team that hopefully with a healthy Lamar, a better offensive system with Todd Monken, you don't want to revert back to what last year was, which was, the defense kind of starting off slow, and it cost the Ravens a couple games, and they were still fighting for the division even without Lamar Jackson. Obviously, hopefully Lamar can stay healthy for a full year. That's the big thing. But this defense, when everybody's healthy, I think Darby and Clowney slot in really well. But it's about keeping everybody healthy, and it's about some young guy stepping up. It's about, David Ojabo stepping up, and Adafeowe stepping up, those young corners, getting a couple of the young defensive linemen step up too. So we'll see what ends up happening with the Ravens defense here in 2023 and the Ravens team in general, honestly. But a couple of big-time signings after a pretty big gut punch with the Marlon Humphrey surgery news. That's all I have here today on Locked On NFL. And of course, if you want to check out more of my work, be sure to check out the Locked On Ravens podcast here, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. But I appreciate everybody for tuning in here to Locked On NFL. Again, be sure to subscribe, follow along in audio form, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow with our Tuesday hosts on Locked On NFL.